Welcome back, everybody, to We Are TPM with myself back today. Kyle Teixeira back today with John Teixeira.
What up?
This week we are back to talk about cost concerns in property management. We talked last week about why not do it yourself. This week we're going to dive into the cost concerns that come with that question. Mm-hmm. So if you have any questions or questions about costs or anything else, give us a call, 817-818-9039. If you have any questions or topics you'd like to hear us talk about here on this podcast or anything else, shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com, and let's get into it. Cost concerns. Is property management a cost concern for investors, John?
Yeah, it's the biggest pain point we hear, right? When we talk about why don't people have a property manager and why do they do it themselves? And we talked a lot about that on our last podcast. And the first reason we get is cost, right? That's what people can't get behind is, if I can do this myself, why would I pay somebody 10% of my revenue, 12% of my revenue, 8%, whatever it is? Why would I pay them any percentage of my revenue to do something that I feel like I could do myself? And we talked a lot about the reasons why not to do it yourself last week, so now we're going to talk about what it actually costs you and why would you pay that money?
Yeah, we'd pull some data. We'd like to back some of it up with some real life cost studies, right? Mm-hmm. So just to start it off, the initial question is fees, right? We've talked about how there's a plethora of different fees, especially in this growing industry, more technology and all that stuff. But the first question is, what's the management fee, right? What is a typical management fee in the U.S. in our industry is 8 to 12% of the monthly rental income is just the standard for what we see out there. Now, there's a lot of different pricing structures these days, so this can vary. But it really comes down to the management fee, the leasing fee, which is a placement fee, which generally is about 50 to 100% of 1 month's rent. And then maintenance and repair markup, which typically that's basically taking all the bills and maintenance that are paid for and marking it up 10 to 20% is what we see on average in the industry. And those are pretty standard numbers. So that's the first concern, right? How, if these costs are involved, then how is the property manager, one, paying for themselves and helping me make more money, right? That's the point. Yeah.
Yep.
So
bottom line is, hiring a property manager, we're going to go drill down into these, but hiring a property manager should make you more money after you pay them these fees, right?
Yes. And even if they make you the same, they're making you more money, right?
Because you now have the time. We talked a lot about this last time. You have the time to build wealth in other ways or build your portfolio, or you just have time.
Yeah.
Maybe just hanging out with your kid and your wife.
Well, and people commonly ask, before we dive into this, and I'm sure we said this a lot on the last one, and I'm going to say it again. They commonly ask the management fee, right, and how much it costs. Well, what's it worth to you? How much do you cost? That should also be asked. How much is you doing it yourself costing you?
The amount of time, people don't realize the amount of time. They think it's just collecting rent. They don't realize the amount of time that's going to go into managing a property. And to be honest, there are periods of time, if you've got a good tenant and they pay on time every month, and you just get a check in the mail at the first and you got a great situation, then there's times when it does make you wonder, why would I pay somebody to do this when Fred just sends me a check on the first of the month every month and never complains and never has a repair. But that's pretty rare, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and collections are not always easy. So even if that is all it is, it's not always easy.
And when Fred loses his job, then things go bad. Then it gets tough again, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. But let's start with the details, right? So how does these cost concerns affect my rental income? Okay, so let's start with rental income. What is that? Your market rents, right? You place a tenant, you hopefully get market rent for the property.
That's right.
How does a landlord determine market rent for a property?
Well, typically they go through, so the average person that doesn't have any tools, right, will probably go on Zillow, Realtor.com, any of those real estate portals and figure out and find out to try to determine what other people are currently renting for, right? Now, the biggest thing that they don't see, and especially in a rising market, this is important, is what have people actually rented for, right? So, you know this, Kyle, when we get to an appointment, people already have a number in mind. And the number they have in mind is because they've gone on Zillow and gotten their Zestimate, or they've gone on and looked to see that the neighbor down the street is now renting for $2,400 a month. So they think they should be
or
also
on the market for $2,400.
On the market, that's what I'm saying.
Listed for $2,400.
Right. So the thing that people don't realize is people could be on the market for 92 days at $2,400, and that's costing them way more than if they had dropped it down to where it should have been at $2,200 or $2,250, whatever it was, right? And so that we don't know what the success, that's not success. Being on the market is not a successful comp, so to speak.
Yeah, so it comes down to marketing expertise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And tenant screening. And this all plays into the long-term cost of this cost consideration. So in market rent analysis, just taken from the data the studies we went through have shown that professional managers often secure higher rents compared to self-managing simply due to their expertise in marketing and tenant strategy. So that is just a higher rent statistic. We're not even taking vacancy or time to close on that tenant. And then according to Buildium, which is they have a plethora of data of this because Buildium is a management system that
a big platform.
Yeah, they're a big platform that property managers use. Professionally managed properties earn up to 10% more in rental income compared to those managed by landlords themselves. So there's the first data point of if on average you're getting 10% more and you're taking 10% as the fee,
you've paid
there's
yourself
step one
in rent.
to paying yourself, right? We won't get into the mathematics of 10% up versus 10% off, but it's about there. So, and then occupancy rates. So this is where we were talking about how long it sits on the market, how long tenants stay, and good paying tenants stay. So, and the data also shows for this that professional managers usually they maintain higher occupant rates, which directly impacts overall rental income. And this is the difference between that tenant staying for 1 year every time or staying for 2 years every time, right? So data says they're more likely to stay and renew with property managers than individual landlords.
Well, that's right. That is another stat. This particular one that you're referring to right now actually comes from NARPM, which is an association that we are heavily involved with.
Members of
National Association of Residential Property Managers. Oh, yes, we're members. And they are actually saying that the vacancy rate is 4 to 5% for managed properties versus 7 to 8% for self-managed properties. So what that means is that difference of 3% basically, right, means that the number of days my property is vacant is going to be a lot smaller than for a self-managed property. Then that's because we have systems in place. We have the staff in place to get it done quicker. We've got the know-how and expertise and all the things that we have.
When you said that's like a 3% difference, I mean, that's 365 days in the year. That's like 11 days difference, that's vacancy
huge. Time.
So prorated amount, depending on the price of the property, that can be a lot.
Cost of vacancy, episode 37.
Yeah, you could, these things all tie together, but this is what you have to consider with costs. And we're just trying to back it up here with data because this is really how,
depending on
these things get considered.
Yeah. And this occupancy time ties directly with what we just talked about with the market rent analysis, right? With trying to get the highest rent you can. There's a balance between doing that and making sure that you have low vacancy rate days, right? Because you're spending money both ways, right? And people have a tendency to focus on the rental rate when actually the vacancy rate is what's costing them the most money. Mm-hmm. So yes, you do want the highest rents you can possibly get. And we just talked about how property managers do that for you, but you also even more importantly, want your vacancy days as short as you can possibly get them. If you can get it to 0 and still get a great tenant that you like in there, that's the best case scenario.
Well, and you're right. It is a balance because you don't want to jump on a bad tenant.
Exactly.
So that's why it is a balance. But there's also a bias, I'd say. Landlords without.
Are we not supposed to have
this
biases?
Market consideration of the rate, things that can cause this to not rent or to have high vacancy can be biased. You could be comparing it to another property that has something you didn't even notice, right? Or like it's on a corner lot, it's on a cul-de-sac, it's on these things.
Those things matter, don't they?
Add value.
Yep.
And to a lot of landlords that don't have expertise in real estate, they'll just be like, "Well, it's in my neighborhood. It's the same. It's in my neighborhood. Same floor plan. It's in my neighborhood." It's like, well, yeah, but there's about 17 trees on your property, which they think, oh yeah, that's shade. No, that's maintenance. Tenants see that as maintenance, right?
Yeah.
So there's just things they don't always think about. So, but you want to dive in some deeper ones?
Yep, let's go for it.
All right, cost benefit analysis. So this is adding in not just the costs and the math we just went through, management fees versus the added revenue. This is like evictions, right? These are things that can cost you severely, and a professional property manager can be a benefit in. So you can completely mitigate the chance of having an eviction, right?
Well, you can, and that's a different podcast, isn't it?
Okay,
you can do things to try to mitigate it.
I was setting you up for a big no there, but
okay,
you're
sorry.
right. We do have we have actually done an episode where you can combine tools to where, yes, you do mitigate that almost completely. But
okay, let's start over. No, Kyle.
No, I set myself up there, I guess. So. Just like anything else, right? Like because they do it every day, professional managers are more adept at handling the legal issues, the things that lead to legal issues, and efficiently dealing with these legal issues and evictions. So, which can cost landlords significantly, and we see that a lot. Before I even get into the data, from my personal experience, the amount of back rent in just months, let's not do money, in months. When I'm in eviction court, there is usually
it's eye-opening, isn't it?
Somewhat equal number of like landlords or lawyers or property managers. I put them in the same category because the lawyers are just there to present what the property managers did, right? When we're all up there in a docket, the amount of rent back rent months for landlords is usually 3 to 6 months
insane.
In back rent.
It's insane.
And that's just from my own personal experience. The data on that's probably even more insane. And then landlords and attorneys, it's usually 1 to 2, on average about 1.5 months, but 1 to 2 months in back rent by the time they're in that court. Does that sound like a cost?
Yeah, it's a huge cost. It's enormous. So first of all, I've never had a conversation with somebody who had a rental property story regarding collections that didn't end in they owed me 2 or 3 months worth of rent, at least. You're right. It's probably 3 months and greater every single time.
And I've talked to people about this, have never even thought of it this way, but there's psychological reasons of why that can actually make it a snowball and make it so where you actually don't get paid. Because priority, rent should be one of your highest priorities in your expenses, right? But what do you need to live in a house? When you rent a property, you need utilities. You need electricity, you need internet, you need water, right? I'll tell you, the water company, the electricity company, and the internet company are not waiting 3 months.
You just put internet before water. Did you do that intentionally?
No, it was just running through my head.
All right.
That's how our GL codes go. So, but so those things would be shut off. They're getting less leeway with the utility companies than they're getting with you. You don't want to put yourself in that line, right? Because then on month 2, if they know they can go 3 months with you or 4 months with you, they're paying the utilities first.
Are we going through the psychology of a tenant?
Yeah. It's that piece that where if you're in court in a month and a half, they paid you before they paid the electric bill, right?
Well, no, you're right, and what you just said is spot on. I wasn't making fun of you. It's you're exactly right. It's part of what we do as property managers. It's part of our collection process, and sometimes we call that training our tenants, right? It's training them in our systems so that they can appropriately put that rent in the right spot, like you were saying, right? Like put it before all the other stuff because it is more important.
I was getting in the psychology of just everybody, right? Because what I just said is, property managers are in there after a month and a half, and on average, and the landlords are in there 3.5 months on average, right? That's everybody looking at the property managers like they're heartless. You're the more heartless person. It's like, no.
We know how this story ends.
You're in court after 3 months because that snowball effect in the back, behind the scenes, you allowed to happen. So,
well, the bottom line is we're only out a month's worth of rent, and that person's out 3 months worth of rent.
Yeah,
period. That's why, because nobody's getting paid at that point.
So let's jump back into the data. So eviction costs. The American Apartment Owners Association estimated that evictions cost landlords between $3,500 and $10,000. And property management significantly helps mitigate these costs through better tenant screening first on the front end and legal expertise for efficiency on the back end.
Common question I get from other realtors that don't know better. Hey, John, do you have a good eviction attorney that you use? Tell me about that, Kyle. Would you use an eviction attorney?
Would I?
I know we have because we've been forced to at some point.
Depends what level this question is.
No. Just in general.
Would I suggest it to that person you're talking to? Probably, or landlords and stuff like that. But should a good property manager need one?
Let's talk about the cost of hiring an attorney versus letting your property manager do it. I don't know about all property managers, but it's part of our service, right? We don't charge our clients anything extra to go through this process. It's part of what we do in managing our properties. Other property managers may charge extra for it. I really don't know. I can't speak for everybody. Having said that, an attorney, Kyle, is going to cost how much?
In our market, it's $700. There's about $700 to $1,100 for that case.
And people would hire an attorney basically because they don't know what to do and they don't want to figure it out. They don't have the time to figure it out. Let's get back to last week's podcast, right? Do you really want to become an expert in evictions? No, you don't. You just have a problem to solve.
Well, and I think this is something we probably never addressed, but having a property manager that does handle their evictions is a pro that we've probably not mentioned before, and I'll tell you why. Even the best lawyer and most experienced lawyer that maybe does this all the time has, assuming everything's done right, the property manager that handled the scenario, being the person to present the case, because this is civil court, puts them at a higher likelihood of winning. Because if there's gray area or the defendant lies or, at the end of the day, this is based on testimony, and firsthand testimony is stronger in a civil case than third-party testimony because they can't testify. They have what you give them, and outside of that realm, they have to either reset the case or they might lose. Where if the property manager was doing it, they could defer that. So I've seen it happen.
Well, if I could re-articulate what you just said in a little bit simpler way, okay? Because you're spot on. You're exactly right. That judge knows that's their courtroom and they know all the rules. Mm-hmm. So the people coming into the courtroom have varying degrees of, let's call it expertise about the rules of why they're there and what to do when they're there and how they're supposed to perform during that case. So when they see a landlord that has a property come in and they're an owner or a tenant, right? That judge knows and has a perception that those people don't have very much information or knowledge about what they're supposed to be presenting or why they're there, right? But when they see an attorney and a property manager, especially one that they see in the courtroom on a regular basis and they know that they know what they're doing, they have a perception that these people have performed the duties leading up to that moment that they needed to perform because they understand the process much better than the other people I described, right? So because of that, all the things you just described happen. The judge may have to dig into that tenant's testimony or that self-managed owner's testimony more, and because they know that they don't understand the steps leading up to it as much.
Well, there may be steps that, the defendant may bring something up like, I didn't get this notice or something like that, and now the judge needs firsthand testimony from the plaintiff. Now the attorney has to go get the property manager. I've seen that. I've seen a judge say you got to come back in a week with the person who delivered this notice. So I also want to disclose that what we're talking about here and the advice to make sure the property manager does it themselves is pretty specific to where we're at, Tarrant County and Texas specifically, just because our property code laws are very business friendly for you to do this. There may be other places where I wouldn't make that suggestion, right? I'd be like, yeah, get an attorney. And then there's different scenarios. Evictions can get appealed up to the county court. We've had that happen. Yep. In that scenario, at least in Dallas County, we as a business, we had to have a lawyer. We weren't even allowed to represent ourselves. So, there's varying reasons to that. So, but let's move on. Let's go.
But before you leave that point, your point here is the purpose of this podcast right here is we're talking about cost. We're doing a cost analysis. So all we're referring to here is when we say, should you get an attorney versus letting your property manager, we're just talking about cost. So let's keep that in mind. We're not giving any advice on whether you should hire an attorney or not hire an attorney. That's a decision you could make separately. We're merely comparing the cost of hiring an attorney versus letting a great property manager do it for you.
Because at the end of the day, it's when things go bad, how bad do they go, right? Because we talk a lot about vacancy cost, turnover cost, eviction cost, maintenance cost. Well, when things go bad, everything we're talking about is all stacked into the same timeline, right? You have no rent coming in. You're getting rid of the tenant. You have legal costs.
Turnover costs.
How long does it take you? 3-4 months to get them out. Now you got turnover and maintenance costs and then placement costs, and then you're back to the tenant being in there, right? So all those things combine when things go bad, because you're like, I could do this myself, and that's usually where people give up, is when things go bad. So maintenance efficiency, which is kind of the next step in that process, is this is just the nature of doing a lot of business. Oftentimes, professional managers have established relationships with contractors, leading to more efficient and cost-effective maintenance. In the heat of summer in Texas, our HVAC contractors will always put us first, right? Because they know what they're going to get. They know they're going to get effective decisions, effective payments, all those things, right? They put when there's a plethora of business for contractors, they start picking and choosing. So, and that's just a easy example for me, but this really applies to all steps of the process.
Yeah, I tell people all the time. I mean, you're going to save a ton of money just by having great maintenance that is there for you in a timely manner, that have a fair price, not always the cheapest price, right? But at a fair price. And you should be getting, like good property manager should be getting, quote unquote, let's call it bulk pricing. As a matter of fact, I think I saw that.
Or non-retail
right,
pricing.
Like a wholesale type of price, right? They know that they're getting tons of business from us. Our AC guy knows every summer and every winter when it gets cold that we're going to be calling them constantly, right? So they kind of put us first.
Yeah, and if I have 100 tickets with them, but your property only has one, you still get the benefit of that wholesale pricing and that use, right?
That's right.
People think that doesn't matter, even if it's the same price. Well, you got the benefit we got responsiveness. We got them there the same day. We got it replaced within 2-3 days, and that leads to the tenant relationship being more happy. That tells them that when the worst can happen, and in our market, in a tenant's mind, the worst that can happen is their AC for their whole house going out in the heat of a Texas summer. Yep. That is the worst thing that could happen, right? I mean, that that commonly happens in horror stories here that leads to them moving out at the end of the lease?
Okay, so compound that with worst case scenario, given that example, right? So worst case scenario is you don't have a contractor like that you trust, and you open up. We don't open up Yellow Pages anymore, do we, Steve? We open up Google. So you go on Google and you find a local AC contractor, and they come out and they say, well, your unit is 15 years old and needs to be replaced, and it's going to cost, $15,000. That's worst case scenario, right? And the reality is it may have been a $75 capacitor, but you don't know any better, right? And that $75 capacitor might cost you $175 with the service fee, and that's what happens most of the time with our contractor. When in reality, or with a lot of these other people, they're gonna use that, and then to follow up with that, our contractor is not going to charge us $15,000 for a new unit when it does need one, right?
Well, and the worst part is the self-managing landlord is way too often using home warranties. You can go to the episodes.
Yep, we have a past episode on that too.
Because that timeline's like 2-3 weeks at best, and you're not going to have a happy tenant after that. Let's read this data off. Is that what you're trying to quote?
Quote this. It's really well quoted.
The cost savings and maintenance efficiency. A survey by the Institute of Real Estate Management, the IREM, found that professional property managers can reduce maintenance costs by 10 to 15% solely due to their network of trusted contractors and bulk purchasing power.
You just nutshelled and articulated everything we said in the past 4 minutes.
Yeah, and we're not just speaking
in
here,
one sentence.
To, back it up a little bit.
Yep.
So let's dive deeper. These are some actual surveys and reports that have been done to kind of outline or check the data on what we're talking about. So Buildium did a property management industry report in 2023. So this is recent data. This report highlights that the properties managed by professionals generally have higher tenant satisfaction and retention rates, which then lead to more stable rental income.
So can I tell you about, while we're in the middle of this, because this correlates really well with a conversation I had with a client recently, okay? And I think we may have talked about this in the past podcast, but one of the things I like to do, that we like to do, is when it comes to renewal time, we do regular inspections of our homes, right? And out of those inspections, we kind of like to create a little punch list of items that need to be repaired in order to keep the home maintained. Sometimes repairs are negligence of a tenant, right? And they may get charged or have to wait for that repair. And sometimes it's just normal wear and tear on the home. The sun's beating down on the exterior of the home, and it needs to be painted or whatever it is, right? And so through this inspection that we do, we're able to ascertain that and kind of create a little punch list of items that just need to be fixed. Part of the reason why I do that, and I've had a conversation with the owners, like, hey, how come every time I have a renewal, I've got this punch list of items that comes through? Like, well, this is exactly what you just described in this report by Buildium is exactly the reason why we do that. Because we now have tenants that are going to stay longer because they think you care enough to keep their home maintained in a reasonable fashion, nothing unreasonable, right? And that makes them want to stay longer than they would normally, because normally they feel like their landlord doesn't care about them. They only care about dollars and rents. And so do you want to turn over? Do you want a tenant to stay for 7 years versus 2.5 years? Of course you do. And this is part of the things you do.
Things at a smaller sample size, and a lot of times if they're considering renewal and these things get them to stay, well, if they don't renew, they're moving out, and now you got vacancy and you have
turnover costs.
And if you have to do those exact same things because they didn't renew that were on that punch list, you still have the cost of vacancy
and
leasing fees and.
Yeah.
And then there's also, we didn't even bring up here, renewal fees that some property managers charge. We don't charge that. We're sending you a punch list that helps your property versus just charging you for signing a contract with a tenant I already charged you for. So, so let's follow that up. So there's also the NARPM State of Property Management Industry Report, and to separate these, we know what these are. Buildium is a property management system, so they're just using back-end data for these reports. NARPM is an association of actual property managers based on the property managers' data. So the report provided insights into the average fees charged by property managers and the benefits that they offer in terms of higher yields and lower vacancy rates. So there's some investor words right there: higher rental yields and lower vacancy rates. That's how you summarize everything pretty much we talk about in this whole episode, but really on this podcast is yields, which are over time, right? Higher yields, lower vacancies. Mm-hmm. And every investor, when they're having a vacancy, they're having a headache too. So, higher happiness. Okay, so the last part, we want to talk about data. We'll speak about a case study, right? I wish I could have got a case study from the Texas market, but we have one from the Seattle market, because they're a lot more open with their data than Texas is. We'll just go over this. So in Seattle, professionally managed properties saw a 12% higher rental income compared to self-managed properties over a 2-year period, primarily due to optimized marketing and tenant retention strategies. And if it was primarily due to tenant retention strategies is one of the biggest points, and they only did this over 2 years, I'd be surprised to see what this was over a longer time horizon, like 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I'm curious whether this is the Seattle area, if this is the city of Seattle.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I feel like you could probably, renting is renting, no matter where it is, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like if that's true in Seattle, to some degree at least, it may vary a little bit. That's going to be true everywhere. You're going to have a very similar result no matter where you did this, whether if you did this in Fort Worth, we actually have a police force in Fort Worth versus Seattle where they don't have a police force. So I feel like people will pay higher rent in Fort Worth than they will in Seattle, maybe. Well, that's my attempt to be funny. Sorry. Political humor.
Yeah, well, I'm going to skip past the political humor and just get into how this is all about weighing cost concerns, right? And one of the ones that jump out at me is if you're weighing increased rental income, reduced vacancy, and maintenance cost, you're also probably considering your property, right? And not to shoot professionally managed in the foot versus non. If you have a distressed property, everything we just talked about should tell you that the numbers of a professional, these numbers get even better, because you're going to have more maintenance, you're likely going to have more turnover, you're likely going to have a harder time renting it, and you're likely going to pay the property manager less to do all those things. So it just makes more sense. Now, I'm not saying on the higher end of that you don't need one either, because we just talked about the reasons you do, but it's more so towards the lower end. You definitely should, and it's worth the money. Yep. So, we jumped into this episode wanting to back up some of this with data, but really dive into the cost concerns. Now we're going to talk in this way about more of the pain points in the weeks to come.
Yeah, I look forward to it. This is really good, Kyle. This is the biggest pain point that people have is cost. What does it cost me? We just gave everybody data to show them from reputable sources why property managers actually will make you more money, right? The cost is inconsequential to the amount of money they'll make you and save you. And that's what we've been saying all along, right? Just to articulate it and sum it up. And that's how you sum it up. But it's nice to have some data that actually proves it.
Yeah, if you want to look these up yourself. There are public reports. NARPM State of Property Management Industry Report of 2023, Buildium Property Management Industry Report. They did a lot of work on these in a year that was 2023. There's a lot going on in the industry, a lot of technology coming up.
We also quoted American Apartment Owners Association, by the way, and we quoted the Institute of Real Estate Management.
Yeah. Well, and I will also bring up before we end this, and we'll probably do another episode on this, that there are because of the technology industry we are in and the plethora of new products that come out in all these various industries, especially property management, there's things that a property manager can get you access to these days that you just can't get as a landlord, right? One of which we offer, which is rent guarantee insurance. They back that up on a portfolio basis. They're not going to do it just for one property.
That's right.
Insurers doesn't make sense to insurers, right? So and that's just one of many products that can help protect your investment that you can only get through a property manager. So look forward to getting into that.
Yep.
It was good. This was a good discussion. So if you guys have anything that you want to hear anything more on this, give us a call, 817-818-9039. If you have any topics or questions and you actually made it to this point in the episode where you're hearing me talk about this, then you are the person I want to send us an email at showmethemoney@weartpm.com about what you might want to hear, what topics you might want to hear. And that's it for John and Kyle. We are out.
Good job.